I could stand on Fifth Avenue and kill people, and nobody would stop me. This is the idea that taken by MAGA of righteous violence. So how many people have embraced the idea of righteous violence? We just saw from the University of Chicago, there's a project that measures American support for political violence, and it's doubled just since last fall.
On the line with us is our old buddy Jeff Sharlet, the journalist, author of multiple books, including most recently the bestseller Undertow, Scenes from a Slow Civil War. He also wrote The Family, of course, Secret Fundamentalism at the Heart of American Power, and executive produced the Netflix miniseries based on that book. I think I'm in that. The website slowcivilwar.substack.com. On Blue Sky, Jeff Sharlet. Bluesky.social. And Jeff, welcome back to the program. Tell us about, I played a clip actually yesterday of Vance Bolter in the Democratic Republic of Congo talking about how he's so enthusiastic about Jesus. I love, and just going on and on like an evangelical pastor. Where did all this start? What do you know about this?
Well, what's fascinating about Vance Bolter is he's kind of at the intersection of two theological traditions. One that I immediately recognized when I saw he was an alumnus of something called the Christ for the Nations Institute, founded by an early 20th century evangelist named Gordon Lindsay. And you walk into that Bible college, it's in Dallas, Texas, and you'll see a giant mural. And on the wall, it says, everyone ought to pray a violent prayer a day. And violent prayer is this tradition of spiritual war. And that he's coming out of that idea that prayer, that your faith is a kind of combat.
So did he attend that college?
He did. And and his most recent sort of LinkedIn sites is still listed as one of the places with which he identifies. He claims to have been ordained in 1993, although there's no evidence. That said, he's in a Pentecostal tradition where ordination can be fairly informal. Mm-hmm. And he's also coming out of this sort of faith healing tradition, which is this idea of constant. It seems like if you watch those sermons in the Congo, they're constantly upbeat and positive, and it doesn't even matter if you fail, which is what this man did throughout his life. He started business after business after business, failing, always guided by his sense of martyrdom. He even named one of his children after a friend of his who was a missionary who was killed while out on his mission field. And you see that because what's interesting about Bolter is he wasn't a guy who was using violent rhetoric before this, but the idea of violent prayer, the idea of spiritual war, that as one student at the Bible college from which he attributes his education puts it, is it just reminds us that the culture is our enemy. And I kind of think we can understand Bolter as a guy who was sort of dipping into that current of violence. It is underneath the surface of his love for Jesus.
Yeah, for people who might have just tuned in, we're talking with Jeff Sharlet, the author of Undertow and The Family, and about Mr. Bolter, Vance Bolter, the MAGA terrorist is what I call him. I don't know why the media doesn't call him that. So it appears, based on what we know of his list, list of people that he had scheduled for assassination, that this is principally an anti-abortion, murder spree, and that's been going on throughout my lifetime, at least going back to the 60s and 70s. To what extent is there an intersection between the violent anti-abortion people and Vance Bolter and the people that he's associated with?
I mean, you almost sort of can see him as heir to a terrorist organization that was active for a number of decades called the Army of God, and associated with any number of clinic bombings, murders, kidnappings, various violent crimes against abortion providers. And I think a lot of people don't realize just how many of those there were. When there would be a murder, and there's been a number of murders over the years, we would hear about that. But the arsons, the bombings, far more than the national news ever covered. And it's kind of this thrum. And I think that's where Bolter takes this turn. In one of the Congo sermons, I think preached in 2023, he talks about what he sees as a problem in the American church. It's too divided. And he gives us an example. One of them, he says, some churches don't even know that abortion is wrong. But he says, God is going to send an apostle or a prophet to correct them. And I think what happens in Bolter's life is he comes to believe that he is that individual, that he's going to do this kind of martyr-like holy war and enter into this tradition of anti-abortion violence.
Well, it appears that he was not experiencing great guilt over taking people's lives. He didn't commit suicide. He apparently thinks he's going to be a martyr. How widespread is this? I mean, what are the chances that there are other Vance Bolters out there? How many people are members of groups or churches or Bible colleges or whatever that advocate this kind of violence, and how many of them actually openly advocate this kind of thing? I'm assuming it's very few, versus kind of wink, wink, nod, nod, advocate it but don't openly do so, or are tolerant of.
Well, I'd like to put this in conversation actually with a different strand, which is a quote we all remember from Donald Trump that says, I could stand on Fifth Avenue and kill people and nobody would stop me. This is the idea that taken by MAGA of righteous violence. So how many people have embraced the idea of righteous violence? We just saw from the University of Chicago, there's a project that measures American support for political violence, and it's doubled just since last fall. I want to be careful about, so for instance, there's a denomination, a Pentecostal denomination or charismatic denomination called Assemblies of God, and Bolter is kind of affiliated with that, though he's sort of bouncing all over the place. I think you are out nerding me on the history of, denominational history. It's never been a real focus of mine, the Assemblies of God. It is a spiritual war tradition, and for the vast majority of people who go to Assemblies of God churches, spiritual war is understood as internal struggle, trying to be a good person, trying to not get drunk, trying not to look at internet porn. That's what spiritual war is.
This is basically the Muslim perspective, the mainstream Muslim perspective on jihad. That it's the struggle within you. It's not the struggle outside of you. It's not go shoot your neighbor. It's shoot your own lust. Basically, it's
right.
And Jesus saying if your eye offends you, pluck it out, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction, and the way that in the United States, jihad came to be understood only as suicide bombers, when for most Muslims, jihad is a personal struggle to be a good person according to your faith. So too spiritual war. But in moments like these, with politics like MAGA, what you see is you take something like a metaphor. Violent prayer is a metaphor. Spiritual war is a metaphor. And it becomes concrete. It becomes real world. A figure like Bolter thinks, I have to put this into action. What is a violent prayer? A violent prayer is a bullet. If I believe abortion is murder, what would I do to stop murder? The murder of children. Why he'd go and shoot people, and one of the legislator's wives dove in front of her own daughter to protect her daughter from this man who thought he was saving children's lives.
Right, and took 9 bullets for her efforts. What can we, Jeff, Sharlet, what can we do about this as a society, as a culture?
What can we do? I always sort of, I think we need to understand this as part and parcel of the kind of the Christian nationalism, the Christian supremacism that has flowed into what I would argue is this contemporary fascist moment. And one thing that I always like to remember is that the opposite of fascism isn't anti-fascism. Anti-fascism is a method that we can use to oppose fascism, but the opposite of fascism is a vibrant democratic culture. And And the way we can do that is we can build that vibrant democratic culture. I see in Minnesota, I think a lot of people are. They're speaking up. They're saying these are not the values that they want to celebrate. We don't need to demonize. We don't need to make that move that some secular folks sometimes do and say, oh, this is what all of Christianity is. No, no, it's not. Bolter is a man who left the tradition, who I think those churches where we can see him online preaching in the Congo would be as horrified by this murder as we are, right? This doesn't have to be the mainstream way. It's becoming it right now. I think we're seeing more and more political violence, and I think we should understand this ultimately, even though he had a religious purpose, as political violence. You target politicians, you seek to achieve political change because of your religious beliefs. It's political violence.
Jeff, we have a little less than a minute and a half left before we hit a hard break I can't control, but we've seen over the last, I would argue, 40 years, 50 years, maybe since Reagan embraced religion as a political weapon. We've seen the rise of this wink, wink, nod, nod to violence and the right-wingism within religious church, within Christianity specifically. And yet it's antithetical to Jesus's teachings. At what point do you expect that we'll start to see a backlash? A pro-Jesus, Jesus the peacemaker backlash?
I'm no prophet, so I'm not going to predict that. But what I will say,
it hasn't started yet, apparently.
Sure, it has. It's never stopped, and countless churches that stand for that. But
right.
I would just sort of say real quick, there's another Christian tradition. Jesus says, "I come to not bring peace, but the sword." Right now, we're seeing a growing number of right-wing churches with their own militias who are embracing what they understand as a war theology of Christianity. Yeah. And we can't just say it's false. It's there. We've got to contend with it.